On the session, we're going to explain how to add a chart to the sidebar insights, as you can see here. As you know, by default, the contacts doesn't have insights on list view. We've configured that so that it shows a chart with the contacts by city for the current user. When configuring and developing these kind of charts, it's good to have in mind some things. The first thing is that the charts will show results depending on the current set of data, so on the current query that's being applied. In this case, these results that you see on the right will be based on these 200 records that I have on my table. If you had 10,000 records, it would be based on that, and it's not paginated at those results. So you need to be careful with the query that you develop, because it may have an impact on performance on the system. Though it's the call that's used for getting the chart data is asynchronous, so it doesn't make you blocked for navigating on the system or to get these records, though it still has an impact when fed on the system if it's a big data and a big volume of data. So let's go into the codes. When starting to do the changes to get your chart to show, the first thing is the configuration, as we said before. You can do this configuration in two ways. You can add it on the list view defs, in this case, because it's showing on the list view. Could be on the detail view defs if you wanted to show on the record view. But in this case, we're working with the list view, so it's on the list view defs. That's how the charts on core modules are configured, are on the list view of those modules. The other way, and is the way that we're going to use on this example, is a Suite 8 only way, just on extensions. On your config folder, you'll see that within config, services, module, list view, and sidebar widgets, you have this entry, module list view sidebar _ widgets. This here has a default widgets with an each widgets entry that's empty, and the module entry that's also empty. What is this? This is a way or a configuration that gives you a way to add, if you want, insights for all modules. If you add for the default, it will be added to any module. And you can also do per module widgets. So it's kind of similar to what you would do within the list view, but on a different place. So the first thing we're going to do is to add a file that's going to extend this configuration. As you can see here on the extensions folder, on the default txt, I've added on config services module list view sidebar widgets folder a new file. This, as you know, or as you noticed, follows the same pattern as this here. Services module list view sidebar widgets, with a difference, which is sidebar widgets here is not a file but a folder. Now on to the file itself. So this file uses the standard way to extend the configurations through PHP with the static function, etc. The first thing we do is to get from the container the parameter for module list view sidebar widgets, which is the same that you saw before on the YAML file. It's the same entry. So this gives me that entry as an array. From that array, as you saw before on the structure, I'm going to get the modules. From those modules, I'm going to see if there's contacts. If there's no contacts, I'm going to have a default initialization as an empty array. And from the contacts configuration, I'm going to get the widgets, and the same here, I'll add a default initialization. Then I'm going to add the configuration for my new insight. In this case, I added a charts key. I said that the type of this insight is charts. the label of the insights is the top label. It's going to show there right after the top border. And I need to add the configurations that are specific for my insight type, in this case for a chart insight. And most importantly is this one here, the charts. As you can see here is an array, meaning you can add multiple, and that's what will drive that drop down that you saw on the front end. The entries on that drop down come from the entries here, so on this array here. In our scenario, I'm only adding one entry, as you saw. I've added the label that you saw before, my contacts by city, and I added here the type. It's a vertical bar chart. And one thing that's very, very important is to add these two entries here with the key for the statistics provider. So this is what will map the front end to the back end, so to speak. Meaning, when the front end loads, it's going to do a request to the statistics API and send this key saying, hey, give me the charts information, chart data for this key, and along with that key, it will send the current criteria and some other information that's useful for the backend. So, but this here is what drives on the statistics API to use one handler or the other. So after adding my configuration, I'm going to re-add it back to the same structure that I had here. Okay, contacts widgets into the contacts configuration, then the contacts configuration to the modules, and the module into the sidebar widgets, and then in the end, I'm going to reset on the container that structure. So I picked that structure, I injected what I wanted, and on the container I set the new structure. So the last step is to add our handler or statistics provider. Where are we going to do that? We're going to do that within the extensions default txt as usual, within the modules folder. Why the modules folder? To follow the same pattern that we see on core. If you go to core, you'll see that you also have modules folder. Let's see, for instance, opportunities. That's a module that we know that has a chart on the list view and other insights as well. As you can see here, opportunities, you have stat folder and you have series and you have two. And this first one is the one that is used for the charts that you see on list view by default. Okay. So we're going to use the same pattern, but on the default ext. So I've added module, contact, statistics, series. So you add your file with whatever name you think it's best. So I added here my contacts by city PHP. And then within the file that you can see here, there's a very, very important thing to keep in mind, which is the namespace. Okay. If you get the wrong namespace, this is not going to work at all. So please double check, triple check that your namespace is correct. It will always be app extensions, the name of your extension, in this case default txt, and then the folders from then on, modules, contacts, and so forth. That's what you have here. Okay. We added our new class. Now you can ask, so okay, I added my class, but how does the statistics API know that this is a statistics provider? That is done by implementing this interface here. If you go to this interface, you'll see here that you'll have to implement two methods, the get key and the get data. Okay. The get key method is what tells the statistics API that this handler gets / implements the way to get the data for that key that we configured on the front end. So when Symfony loads, when Suite loads, it will check all the classes that implement this interface, will create a map by key, and then later on, when the front end calls that the statistics API, it will check the key. Is there a handler with this key? If it has that handler, it will call it. If not, it will throw an error. Cool. So we are going to implement that interface, And we're going to extend legacy handler. Why extending legacy handler? Because we're going to need to access parts of the legacy code. And for doing that, the way that Suite has is using legacy handlers. So the first thing that you probably already noticed is this here. This is the same key that I added on the configuration on the other side. So I've added my constructor with all that's needed for my parent, which is the legacy handler, plus a query handler. This query handler is a helper class that will help you with building the queries that you need to get the data, as well as another class called module name mapper, which helps mapping front-end modules to back-end modules. The front-end modules are what you see on the URL, like contacts, quotes, though in back-end quotes is AOS quotes or something like that. So this is what maps one to the other. It uses a map for that. That's on legacy. We implement the method that we need here, get key, and the handler key is the method that we need to implement from legacy handler. Then the last thing we need to do, and the most important, is to implement the get data. So as I said, this is a legacy handler. We're going to be managing and manipulating things on legacy and using legacy classes. So we need to call inits and start. This will bootstrap legacy so that you have access to everything. One of the things I need is my current user. Then the first thing I need to do is to get the input from the front end, so sent by the chart on the front end, and then check if everything is okay. You have this helper class here, which is extract context, which already knows what kind of data the front end sends for the statistics API, and will get you that. So the module, the ID, the criteria, and the sorting, etc. So I check if there's a module or not, and if it's contacts, because this only applies for contacts. I'm checking my current user. Then I'm going to map my UI name to my legacy name so that they can get the corresponding bin, and I see here if that bin exists or not. So if not, I'm always going to send an empty response back. So this is getting and validating the data. The next part is to get the query. So as I said before, we have this query handler. This query handler will build you with the current criteria in the bin the same query that is being used to show the list view data. Okay, and here it's going to give you a query array with the multiple parts of that query. And this is what allows you to then manipulate and get results that are consistent with the data that you see on the UI. Let's go into this generic query, which is within my class still. As you can see here, we have select, where, etc. So what I'm doing here is overriding parts of that query so that we get the results that we need for our charts. Okay. So I'm doing a group by, as you can see here at the end. I'm grouping by primary address city because we want to show the results by city. I changed the selects and I changed the where a bit. As you can see here, I'm not overriding the where, I'm just adding to the current where, because the current where is already checking, imagine that you have any filters, it's checking that criteria that's on the where, so you should probably not override the where completely unless you want a totally different query. You should just add up to the current where. So in this case, I'm changing the select to get the data that I need, so I'm getting two things. One is the primary address city, so this is going to group by and it's going to only go to the cities that exist. And then I count the total for that for the cities. On the where, I also add here a filter for the assign user ID. Okay. Going back to where we were. So I've got the base query, then I manipulated that query to do what I want, and to get the results, you just have to call this run query, which is all yet again calling the query handler. I came to this method to show you one very important thing, which is this here. We're sending limit -2. -2 means not add a limit. So as I said before, it's going to use the full data set. This is not going to be paginated. So I call this base run query that will do everything for me, and that will get me my results. The last part is to build the series, the response type that the chart expects. For that, you have this build series. On this single series, you can pass on the full results and then the name and the total, and it's going to build the data in the way that the front end expects, knowing that our chart is grouping by primary address city, and we wanted to show the totals for each of those cities. So that's what this is used for. Lastly, you can set some charts options. There's some options here that in this case, we're not using, that you can set. And then if you want on your statistic, you can override or add extra chart options that then the front end is going to read. Those chart options are going to vary a lot depending on the kind of chart you're using. If it's a vertical bar chart, a pie chart, and so forth. So you build a series response, you can set a data type, in this case is int, you pass on your series, chart options, and then you send the result back. And that's all that you need to do to get your charts working.